Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be answering the question why fast fashion is so cheap. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button if you want to see more content on zero waste, low impact living and sustainability, and more deep dives into things like why fast fashion is so cheap. Hit the notification bell as well so that you never miss another video because it really supports my channel, especially in that YouTube algorithm. I went into this research not knowing much about fast fashion. But once I dug a little deeper, what I found out about fast fashion has forever changed the way I view the clothes that I wear. And I'm really hoping that through this video, I can help change your mind as well. So let's start with what fast fashion actually is. Fast fashion can be defined as cheap, trendy clothing that samples ideas from the catwalk or celebrity culture and turns them into garments in high street stores at breakneck speed. The term fast fashion was coined by the New York Times when Zara's mission of taking only 15 days to get a garment from the catwalk into stores was actualized. There are now even cheaper and faster alternatives like Misguided, Forever 21, Primark, Boohoo, Zaful, and lots more. I believe there is one reason why fast fashion is so cheap for the intended customer. It is greed. I'll explain why. Fast fashion companies adhere to the pile 'em high, sell 'em cheap school of thought. This strategy will make a profit if they do two things: sell a lot of items, and B, maximize the profit margin on each item. But if they want to sell their items incredibly cheaply and make maximum profit, their production costs need to be minuscule. And because fast fashion companies are solely focused on profit, they seem to be willing to do almost anything to drive down production costs at the expense of the most vulnerable in their supply chain. We will cover some shocking examples of these practices in the next part of the video. So, how do they drive down production costs? And actually, what is wrong with it? Firstly, let's talk about materials and how brands leverage their purchasing power to ensure costs are forever decreasing. Fast fashion brands use synthetic, natural, and animal-derived materials. They use synthetic textiles like polyester, of which the great majority on the market is very poor quality and is used by manufacturers because it is a cheap alternative to natural fibers. Animals are also impacted by fast fashion when leather and fur are used as materials. Lots of real fur is being produced in such terrible conditions in fur farms that it's actually become cheaper to produce than faux fur. There was a scandal in the UK maybe a couple of years ago now where cat fur was actually being used and pretending to be faux fur. I'll link the article in the description below, but it is absolutely appalling how low fast fashion are willing to stoop to cut costs. Even natural fabrics can be a problem at the scale fast fashion demands. And to make natural fabrics resilient so that they grow faster and more uniformly, the amount of pesticides and other chemicals used on crops has dramatically intensified, again to reduce costs. So how do they ensure that these fibers are so cheap? They create a big drive towards the intensification of agriculture, where the land is almost reconsidered as if it was a factory in itself. With the addition of nitrogen fertilizers that don't do well with native crops, producers like Monsanto simply redesign the plant to take on more chemicals. GMO is a way for a brand to own the seed. This is part of the aggressive approach to monopolize agriculture by fast fashion brands, to continually drive down prices lower as farmers have little alternative to purchase seeds elsewhere. Now, while cheap materials are a fundamental reason as to why fast fashion is able to be so cheap, the real problem and the real greed lies in cheap labor. From what I found, there seem to be three main reasons as to how brands are able to leverage cheap labor to manufacture their goods. Let's start with the first one. Moving production overseas. A globalized production means the making of goods has been outsourced to low-cost economies, particularly where wages are very low and kept low, like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, and many more. Those at the top of the value chain get to choose where the products are being made, and they get to switch if the factory says we can't make them that cheap anymore. The brand will say, we'll switch to another place which is cheaper, forcing the factory workers to work up to 150 hours of overtime. One factory owner in Bangladesh told the True Cost documentary, which is a wonderful resource, that because the factory owners need their business so badly, the brands can squeeze them to make their products, forever lowering prices to beat their competition. So for example, if we take a brand looking at their competitor who sells a t-shirt for $5, they are then going to want to sell that t-shirt for $4. So they put pressure on those in the factories to reduce their costs so that they can maintain a competitive price. This is all part of the aggressive global brand strategy to ensure costs are cut at every single turn. And this inevitably means that the garment workers are the ones who pay, and working conditions are hit the hardest. This leads me on to ensuring that fair wages for garment workers are almost never met. In an article that Good On You wrote, they shared an Oxfam 2019 report about the living wage in garment factories. What percentage do you think that workers in Bangladesh earn a living wage? 0. Now what about Vietnam? Only 1% of Vietnamese garment workers earn a living wage. The True Cost claims that over 85% of garment workers, being women, earned a minimum wage of less than $3 a day in Bangladesh, making them some of the lowest paid garment workers in the world. While Fast Fashion Revolution shared that in Guangdong in China, young women face 150 hours of overtime each month, 60% have no contract, and 90% have no access to social insurance. This makes it incredibly difficult for garment workers to improve their situation, as they are unable to save even a small amount of money each month. Fashion Revolution has also reported that the legal minimum wage in most garment producing countries is rarely enough for workers to live on. For example, in Bangladesh, it's estimated that the minimum wage only covers 60% of the costs, and that's just the cost living in one of the poorest areas of the city. Low wages and the speed at which garment workers are expected to create these clothing keeps them in a cycle of poverty and adds to the pressure to work these overtime and long hours, which not only impacts their health, but also their safety. All we have to do is look at the incident in Rana Plaza, where over 1,100 people lost their lives for our clothing, because fast fashion is a system that is broken and is rotten at every single level. Well, you might be thinking, why don't these workers just simply ask for better pay and better working conditions? Well, this leads me on to my next point. Workers are often subjected to violence and harassment to prevent them from unionizing. Just a quick reminder, guys, if you are enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up, because it really supports this message and it really supports us getting this video out there so more people can learn about the true cost of fast fashion. So one of the most shocking examples of this is in the True Cost documentary, where they interviewed a 23-year-old garment worker, Shima, who said this. After she created a union in her factory, they came up with a list of demands and gave them to their managers. The managers' response was to lock the doors and punish their workers with violence. This reaction further promotes the cycle of poverty and abuse that predominantly women have to face in this industry, and it is disgusting. This is a perfect example of how the model of fast fashion keeps workers in that cycle of poverty, thus allowing this oppressive system to continue to churn out clothing at any cost. Ultimately, something has to give. And just as we saw with Rana Plaza, brands and suppliers cut corners to make it work, disregarding safety measures and the basic human rights of garment workers, all to produce cheap clothing and maximize profits. Okay, for now let's get back to the pile 'em high, sell 'em cheap model that the fast fashion industry uses. They need to ensure that there is sufficient demand for these cheap clothing items that they are manufacturing. So how is that demand created and maintained? New trends constantly. That's why, as Lucy Siegel puts it in the True Cost documentary, instead of having 2 seasons a year, we practically have 52. We have something new coming in every week, and fast fashion has created this essentially so it can shift more product. The second thing is poor quality. Poorer quality clothing means that consumers have become used to wearing an item of clothing that doesn't last. But this is not seen as a problem, because they may have only paid a couple of pounds for that t-shirt in the first place. This is how we end up with a throwaway culture, where you get rid of an item of clothing that you either bought because it's no longer fashionable or because it's falling apart, whichever comes first. The whole fast fashion model is built on careless production and endless consumption. I think it's also important to note the disposal, because when we're thinking about end life of items, once they hit the shelves, that industry is no longer responsible for them. And this is a fundamental flaw in their model and in our waste streams. Clothes can be produced so cheaply because countries like the US also have a means of disposing of them cheaply. Around 10% of the clothes the US actually ends up in thrift stores. The rest end up in developing countries like Haiti, leaving them to deal with our waste. This also means that the local industry has become non-existent, so fast fashion waste has become so insidious, it has now seen the decline of independent and artisanal designers. To me, this really sounds like cultural erasure. If fast fashion companies are no longer responsible for the journey of an item once it leaves its shelves, then the industry has structured itself in a way that successfully accumulates capital while simultaneously leaving the most vulnerable to deal with the stream of destruction in its path. Tanning, for example, in Kanpur. This is a perfect example of garment workers not only suffering at the hands of the chemicals that are being used, but also a blatant disregard by the fast fashion model for its garment workers and for the waste that is produced making their clothes. Chemicals flow into local farming, into waterways and into their food, creating incredible health problems for those of local residents. Major Western brands are able to source cheap materials while avoiding accountability for the waste of that cheap clothing. Now, I do want to just add that even though luxury brands are expensive, does not mean that they are any less harmful. For example, if we take Burberry, a couple of years ago, I think in 2018, they disposed of over £28 million worth of stock. And when I say disposed, I mean destroyed, because they were afraid of counterfeiting. But we'll discuss that in the next video. Of course, not everybody can boycott or move away from fast fashion because everyone's economic situation is different. However, there are 5 main ways that you can spot a fast fashion brand. Number 1, they will have thousands of new pieces of clothing that closely relate to current trends. 2, they will have an extremely short turnaround from when you see that item on a catwalk to when you see it on that brand's shelves. 3, as offshore manufacturing is the cheapest, as we mentioned earlier, the use of workers without adequate human rights, basic fair pay, childcare, etc. is a key indicator that this is a fast fashion brand. Number 4 is limited quantity of a particular item. Now, Zara pioneered this idea to create the illusion of scarce resources, creating this kind of mass excitement around a singular piece of clothing. And 5, the use of cheap materials, as we mentioned earlier, like polyester. Now that you know what to look for to avoid, what should you do next? My video on how to shop sustainably really breaks it down for you. Okay, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up because it really supports my channel and the research that goes into a video like this. I really care about this message and I think it's so important that we spread this message far and wide. If you're not already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another video in this series and support the work that I'm doing. Again, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. And if you can share it with a friend, please do. Okay, thank you for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.